If you had told me 10 years ago that my parents would one day beg me for a job, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't think I'd be successful, but because I never imagined they'd ever need me. Growing up, my parents were the definition of traditional. My dad was an engineer, my mom a teacher, and they had a very clear vision of what success looked like: a stable job, a respectable title, and a life that fit neatly into the box they'd drawn for me. I was the oldest child, the one who was supposed to set the example. From the time I was little, my life was planned out for me. I was going to be a doctor. It wasn't even a question. My parents talked about it at family gatherings, told their friends, and even bought me a toy stethoscope when I was 5. I didn't mind at first. I liked making them proud. But as I got older, I realized that the dream they had for me wasn't mine. I loved art. I loved drawing, painting, and losing myself in colors and shapes. I spent hours in my room, sketching characters and imagining worlds. But every time my parents saw me with a pencil in my hand, they'd shake their heads. "That's a nice hobby," my mom would say, "but it won't pay the bills." My dad was even more blunt. "Artists starve, doctors thrive." I tried to follow their plan. I took science classes, joined the pre-med club, and even volunteered at the hospital. But my heart wasn't in it. I struggled with the coursework, dreaded every exam, and felt like I was living someone else's life. The only time I felt alive was when I was drawing. When it came time to apply for college, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep pretending. I applied to art schools in secret, sending portfolios and essays without telling my parents. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I felt a mix of joy and terror. I knew what I wanted, but I also knew what it would cost. I waited until the night before decision day to tell them. We were sitting at the dinner table, the air thick with expectation. I took a deep breath and said, "I'm not going to medical school. I'm going to art school." The silence that followed was like a physical weight. My mom's fork clattered to her plate. My dad just stared at me, his face hardening. "No, you're not," he said. "We didn't raise you to throw your life away." I tried to explain, to tell them how much art meant to me, how I couldn't imagine spending my life doing anything else. But they wouldn't listen. My mom cried. My dad yelled. They accused me of being selfish, of disrespecting everything they'd sacrificed for me. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." I left that night with nothing but a suitcase and my portfolio. I slept on a friend's couch for weeks, worked part-time jobs to pay for tuition, and lived on instant noodles and hope. It was hard. Harder than I ever imagined. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But every time I picked up a pencil, I remembered why I was doing this. Art school was a revelation. I was surrounded by people who understood me, who shared my passion and pushed me to be better. I learned new techniques, explored different mediums, and found my voice as an artist. I started selling my work online, taking commissions, and even landing a few gallery shows. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My parents didn't call. They didn't write. They didn't come to my graduation. I sent them invitations, hoping they'd change their minds. But the seats I reserved for them stayed empty. It hurt, but I kept going. I built a life without them, one brushstroke at a time. After graduation, I moved to the city. I rented a tiny studio apartment, took freelance jobs, and networked like crazy. I worked for design agencies, illustrated children's books, and even did storyboards for animation studios. The money wasn't great at first, but I learned to hustle. I learned to market myself, to negotiate, to turn rejection into motivation. Slowly, things started to change. My work got noticed. I won a few awards, landed bigger clients, and started making a name for myself. I saved every penny, invested in better equipment, and never stopped learning. I built a portfolio that made me proud, a body of work that told my story. The city wasn't easy, but it was alive. Every day, I walked past galleries and street artists, saw murals blooming on brick walls, and felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. I made friends with other creatives, writers, musicians, photographers, people who understood what it meant to chase a dream that no one else believed in. We shared cheap dinners, split rent, and celebrated every small win like it was a major award. My first big break came when a local gallery owner saw my work online and invited me to showcase in a group exhibition. I spent weeks preparing, pouring my heart into every piece. The night of the opening, I was nervous, wondering if anyone would even notice my art among so many talented people. But to my surprise, my section was crowded all night. People asked about my process, my inspiration, and even bought several pieces. I walked home that night with tears in my eyes, feeling seen for the first time in years. After that, opportunities started to snowball. I got commissions from local businesses, designed posters for music festivals, and even did a mural for a new cafe. My social media following grew, and so did my confidence. I started teaching art classes on the weekends, sharing what I had learned with kids who reminded me of my younger self, dreamers who just needed someone to believe in them. But even as my career took off, the void left by my family never fully closed. I sent them updates, photos of my shows, articles about my work, even a check when I sold my first big piece. I never got a response. Sometimes I'd see my mom's handwriting on a birthday card from an aunt, or hear from a cousin that my dad had seen my art in a magazine, but they never reached out directly. It was like I had become a ghost in my own family. I threw myself into my work, using the pain as fuel. I started a series of paintings about family, about expectations and rejection, about the loneliness of choosing your own path. The series went viral online, and soon I was invited to show it in a major gallery. The opening night was packed. Critics, collectors, even a few celebrities. I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by my art, and felt a sense of pride I'd never known. A few months later, I got an email from an international art fair inviting me to exhibit in Europe. It was a dream come true. I spent weeks preparing, shipping my work overseas, and planning the trip. When I arrived, I was overwhelmed by the energy. Artists from all over the world, each with their own story, their own struggles, and triumphs. I made connections that would shape my career for years to come. When I returned home, I found myself in demand. Galleries wanted solo shows, brands wanted collaborations, and I was even approached to illustrate a children's book. I hired an agent to help manage the offers, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I moved into a bigger apartment, one with enough space for a studio. I bought better supplies, invested in myself, and started thinking about the future. I wanted to give back, to create opportunities for other artists who were just starting out. I started a scholarship fund for young creatives, hosted free workshops, and mentored students from my old high school. But no matter how much I achieved, there was always a part of me that wished my parents could see it. I wondered if they were proud, if they ever regretted pushing me away. Sometimes I'd walk past a family in the park, a mom and dad cheering on their kid at a soccer game or helping with homework at a cafe, and feel a stab of jealousy. I wanted that kind of support, that kind of love. Still, I kept moving forward. I learned to celebrate myself, to find joy in my accomplishments, even if no one else did. I built a family of friends, of fellow artists and dreamers who understood what it meant to be different. We supported each other, lifted each other up, and never let anyone feel alone. Then one day, everything changed. I got a call from a major animation studio, one of the biggest in the world. They'd seen my work online and wanted to hire me as a lead art director for their next feature film. It was the kind of opportunity I'd only ever dreamed of. I flew out for the interview, met with the team, and within a week, I had the job. The contract was life-changing. It came with a 6-figure salary, full creative control, and the chance to work with some of the most talented people in the industry. I moved to a new city, bought a beautiful loft, and started working on the film. Every day was a challenge, but it was the kind of challenge I'd always wanted. The first few months at the animation studio were a whirlwind. I was surrounded by creatives who had worked on movies I'd watched as a kid, and now I was leading them. The pressure was intense, but I thrived on it. I poured myself into the project, working late nights and early mornings, sketching storyboards, designing characters, and collaborating with writers and directors. I felt alive in a way I never had before. The film was a story about family, about choosing your own path, about the courage to be different. It wasn't lost on me how much it mirrored my own life. I put my heart into every frame, hoping that someone out there would see themselves in the characters, would feel less alone because of the story we were telling. As the months passed, the buzz around the film grew. Trailers dropped online and went viral. Fans started speculating about the art style, the themes, the characters. I did interviews with magazines and podcasts talking about my journey from being disowned to leading a major film. I never spoke badly about my parents, but I was honest about the pain of being rejected for choosing my passion. The premiere night arrived, and it felt like a dream. The red carpet, the flashing cameras, the celebrities, it was all so surreal. I stood in the theater, watching the film with an audience for the first time, listening to them laugh, cry, and applaud. When the credits rolled and my name appeared as lead art director, I felt a wave of pride and relief. I'd made it. I'd done it on my own terms. The film was a massive success. It broke box office records, won awards, and was praised for its artistry and heart. I was invited to speak at conferences, to judge art competitions, to teach master classes at universities. My social media blew up with messages from aspiring artists, parents, and even teachers who said the film had changed the way they saw creativity and family. But even in the midst of all the success, there was an emptiness I couldn't ignore. I wished my parents could see what I'd accomplished, could understand why I'd chosen this path. I wondered if they'd heard about the film, if they'd seen my name in the credits, if they were proud, even if they'd never say it out loud. One evening, after a long day at the studio, I got an email from an old family friend. She'd seen the film and recognized my name. "Your parents are talking about you," she wrote. "They're showing the movie to everyone they know. They don't say much, but I think they're proud." I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, tears in my eyes. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, they were starting to see me for who I really was. A few weeks later, I got another email, this time from my mom. It was short, just a few lines. "We saw your movie. It was beautiful. I hope you're well." I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to pour out everything I'd felt over the years, the hurt, the loneliness, the pride, the love. Instead, I just wrote back, "Thank you. I'm happy. I hope you are too." We started exchanging emails every few weeks. They were awkward at first, filled with small talk and safe topics, but slowly the walls began to come down. My mom asked about my work. My dad sent me articles about art and film. It wasn't the relationship I'd once hoped for, but it was a start. As the film's success continued, I was offered even bigger opportunities. I started my own studio, hiring a team of young artists who reminded me of myself. We worked on commercials, short films, and eventually another feature. I became known not just as an artist, but as a leader, a mentor, and an advocate for creative freedom. My life was full, busy, challenging, and deeply rewarding. I traveled the world, spoke at events, and built a community of people who believed in the power of art to change lives. I never forgot where I came from, and I never stopped hoping that one day my parents would fully accept me. And then one day, everything changed again. I got a call from my dad. His voice was quiet, unsure.
"We need to talk," he said. "Can we meet?" I agreed to meet my dad at a small coffee shop in the old part of town. It was the kind of place we used to go when I was a kid, back when life felt simple and the future wasn't so heavy. I arrived early, nervous, wondering what he wanted to say. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked older, more tired, his hair grayer than I remembered. We sat across from each other, the air filled with the smell of coffee and fresh bread. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "I've been watching your career," he said, his voice low. "I've seen your films, read the articles. I didn't understand it at first, but I'm proud of you." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent years imagining this moment, wondering if it would ever come. I wanted to ask why it took so long, why he couldn't have said it sooner, but I just nodded, afraid that if I spoke, I'd start to cry.
He looked down at his hands, fiddling with his coffee cup. "Your mom and we made mistakes. We were scared. We didn't want you to struggle. We thought we knew what was best, but we were wrong. You did it your way, and you made it." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "It wasn't easy," I said. "I missed you both. I wanted you to be proud, but I couldn't live someone else's life." He nodded, his eyes shiny. "I know. I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive us." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who helped me with homework, who'd held my hand when I was scared. I saw the fear, the regret, the love. "I forgive you," I said, my voice shaking. "I just want us to try again." He smiled, relief washing over his face. "I'd like that." We talked for hours, catching up on lost time. He asked about my work, my friends, my life. I asked about Mom, about my siblings, about how they'd been. It was awkward at first, but slowly the old familiarity returned. As we left the cafe, my dad paused. "There's something else," he said. "Your mom and I were having a hard time. The school where she worked closed, and I was laid off last year. We've been looking for work, but it's tough. We're struggling." I felt a mix of emotions. Surprise, sadness, and, if I'm honest, a little bit of bitter satisfaction. For years, they'd told me my career wasn't real, that I'd never make it. Now they were the ones in need. He looked at me, hope in his eyes. "I know it's a lot to ask, but do you have any jobs at your studio? Anything we could do?" I stood there, stunned. I never imagined this day would come. The day my parents would ask me for help, for a chance to be part of the world they'd once rejected. I told him I'd think about it, that I'd talk to my team and see what was possible. We hugged, and for the first time in years, it felt real. When I got home, I sat in my studio staring at the walls covered in art, in memories, in proof of everything I'd built. I thought about what it meant to forgive, to offer a hand to the people who'd hurt me. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. The next day, I called my mom. She sounded nervous, unsure of what to say. I told her I'd spoken to Dad, that I wanted to help if I could. She cried, thanking me over and over, apologizing for the past. I told her it was okay, that we could start fresh. I talked to my team, explained the situation, and together we found roles that fit my parents' skills. My mom started helping with administrative work, organizing events, and managing schedules. My dad took on a maintenance role, fixing things around the studio and helping with deliveries. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave them purpose, a place to belong. At first, it was awkward. My parents were shy, unsure of how to fit in, but my team welcomed them, taught them the ropes, and soon they were part of the family I'd built. We started having family dinners again, laughing about old times, sharing stories, and slowly the old wounds began to heal. As the months passed,
My parents settled into their new roles at the studio. It was strange at first, seeing my mom at the front desk, greeting clients with her warm smile, or my dad in the workshop fixing easels and laughing with the younger artists. Sometimes I caught them watching me during meetings or events, their faces filled with a mix of pride and humility. It was a far cry from the days when they disowned me for choosing this path. I made sure they felt included, inviting them to team lunches, asking for their opinions on projects, and celebrating their contributions. My mom organized a charity art auction that raised thousands for local schools. My dad started a weekly fix-it workshop, teaching young artists how to build and repair their own tools. They found purpose in the work, and I saw them grow in ways I never expected. Our relationship wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still old habits that were hard to break. Sometimes my dad would offer unsolicited advice, or my mom would worry about my schedule, slipping back into her old role, but we talked through it, learning to communicate in a way we never had before. We were all changing, all learning to let go of the past. The studio thrived. We landed new clients, expanded into animation and digital media, and even opened a second location. I hired more artists, gave internships to students from underprivileged backgrounds, and started a charity scholarship fund in my grandmother's name. My parents were involved in every step, helping to plan events, mentor young people, and build a community that felt like family. One day, a local news crew came to do a story on the studio. They interviewed me about my journey, about being disowned and then reunited with my parents. The segment aired on TV, and suddenly, people from all over the city were reaching out. Parents who'd lost touch with their kids, young artists who had been rejected for their dreams, even teachers who wanted to bring their students to visit. The response was overwhelming. I received letters, emails, and messages from people who said my story gave them hope. Some told me they'd reached out to estranged family members. Others said they'd finally found the courage to pursue their passions. I realized that my pain had become a source of healing for others, that my story was bigger than just me. My parents were proud, but they were also humble. They never took credit for my success, never tried to rewrite history. Instead, they supported me quietly, showing up every day, doing the work, and loving me in the best way they knew how. We found a new kind of peace, one built on honesty, forgiveness, and the willingness to grow. As the studio grew, so did my sense of purpose. I started speaking at schools and conferences, sharing my story with young people who felt lost or alone. I told them that it was okay to choose their own path, that failure wasn't the end, and that sometimes the people who love us most just need time to understand. I also started writing essays, blog posts, even a memoir about my journey. The response was incredible. People from all over the world reached out, sharing their own stories of rejection and reconciliation. I realized that I wasn't alone, that there were thousands of others who'd walked the same road. My parents read everything I wrote. Sometimes my mom would leave little notes on my desk, quotes from my essays, or just a simple, "I'm proud of you." My dad would send me articles about art and creativity, or leave tools in my studio with a note that said, "For your next masterpiece." We started having family dinners again, inviting friends and colleagues, sharing stories and laughter. It wasn't the family I'd once dreamed of, but it was real and it was ours. One night, as we sat around the table, my dad raised his glass. To second chances, to forgiveness, and to the courage to follow your heart. We toasted, and I looked around at the people who'd hurt me, who'd healed me, who'd helped me be who I was. I realized that success wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about love, about family, about the journey we take to find ourselves. The years that followed were filled with growth, both personal and professional. My studio became a hub for creativity and community, a place where people from all walks of life came to learn, create, and connect. We hosted art fairs, charity events, and even film screenings. My parents were always there, my mom welcoming guests with her infectious smile, my dad helping set up chairs or fixing lights, always ready to lend a hand. I traveled to speak at international conferences, sharing my story with audiences from all over the world. I met young artists who'd been disowned for their dreams, parents who'd reconnected with their children, and educators who wanted to bring more creativity into their classrooms. Everywhere I went, I saw the impact of choosing your own path, of having the courage to be different. My parents and I grew closer than ever. We talked openly about the past, the hurt, the misunderstandings, the fear that had driven us apart. We laughed about old memories, cried over the years we'd lost, and promised to never let pride or fear come between us again. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes old wounds would resurface. Sometimes we'd argue or misunderstand each other, but we always found our way back. Always chose love over anger. The studio continued to grow. We partnered with schools, museums, and nonprofits to bring art to underserved communities. We started an annual scholarship for young artists, and I mentored students who reminded me of my younger self, eager, talented, and hungry for a chance. I watched them blossom, finding their voices and sharing their stories with the world. One summer, we hosted a huge art festival in the city park. Thousands of people came. Families, students, artists, and curious onlookers. My parents helped organize the event, and I could see the pride in their eyes as they watched me on stage, introducing speakers and awarding scholarships. Afterwards, my mom hugged me tight. She said, "I never could have imagined this. I'm so glad you did." My dad, too, found new purpose. He started teaching woodworking classes at the studio, sharing his skills with young people who'd never held a hammer before. He became a mentor, a friend, and a father figure to many of them. I saw him light up in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child. As the years passed, our family grew. Not just by blood, but by choice. Friends, colleagues, and students became part of our story. We celebrated holidays together, hosted potlucks and game nights, and built a community that felt like home. I kept writing, sharing my story in books, articles, and online. I received letters from people all over the world, some thanking me for giving them hope, others sharing their own journeys of reconciliation and growth. I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been told they weren't enough, who'd ever had to fight for their dreams. My parents became advocates for the arts, speaking at events and encouraging other families to support their children's passions. They told our story honestly, the mistakes, the regrets, the joy of finding each other again. They became role models for other parents, proving that it's never too late to change, to grow, to love better. One night, after a long day at the studio, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. My mom turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry for all the years we lost," she said. "I'm sorry for not believing in you." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I forgive you," I said. "I wouldn't be who I am without everything we went through. I'm grateful for the journey, even the hard parts." My dad nodded, his voice soft. "We're proud of you, not just for your success, but for your kindness, your courage, your heart." We sat there in silence, watching the stars appear one by one. I realized that I'd found something even more important than success. I'd found a peace, forgiveness, and a family that loved me for who I was. The studio celebrated its 10th anniversary with a gala that brought together everyone who'd been part of the journey. The space was filled with artwork from students, colleagues, and even pieces from my early days, reminders of how far we'd all come. My parents stood by my side, greeting guests, sharing stories, and beaming with pride. It was a night of laughter, tears, and gratitude. During my speech, I looked out at the crowd, at the young artists who'd found their voices, the parents who'd learned to support their children, the friends who'd become family. I spoke about the power of forgiveness, the importance of choosing your own path, and the beauty of second chances. I thanked my parents for having the courage to change, for asking for help, for teaching me that love is stronger than pride. After the gala, my mom pulled me aside. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so grateful you never gave up on us." I hugged her, feeling the weight of the past lift away. We all had to grow, but we did it together. My dad joined us, his arm around both of us. "You taught us more than we ever taught you. You showed us what it means to be brave." The years that followed were filled with new adventures. I traveled to new countries, learned new skills, and took on projects that pushed me out of my comfort zone. My parents continued to work at the studio, mentoring young people and sharing their story with anyone who would listen. We became a family that others looked up to, not because we were perfect, but because we'd learned to love imperfectly. I kept writing, painting, and teaching. I started a podcast, interviewing other creatives about their journeys, their failures, and their triumphs. I received messages from listeners all over the world, people who'd been disowned, who'd lost hope, who'd found inspiration in our story. I realized that my life had become a beacon for others, a reminder that it's never too late to start over. One day, a young artist came to the studio, her eyes filled with fear and hope. "My parents don't understand me. They want me."
Storyteller. My parents disowned me for my career choice, but now they're asking me for a job. And together, we've built a life that's richer, deeper, and more meaningful than any of us could have imagined.